Hello, hope everyone's doing well, and welcome back to Worship Wednesday. And this Worship Wednesday is gonna be a little bit special. It's a two-in-one because the two subjects are intertwined. You can't talk about one without the other. So today's subjects are Drake and Golden Hind. That's because Golden Hind was one of the namesake Drake's ships, probably one of his most famous ships during his career. I'll mainly be focusing on Drake's expedition aboard Golden Hind, but if you go to any library, you should be able to find extensive biography on Francis Drake. So our Drake, the PR-3 heavy cruiser, is Wargame's interpretation of a Royal Navy design to mainly counter the Deutschland class of their commerce raiders, so Deutschland, Gaspé, Admiral Scheer, and what they in the US Navy thought the Japanese were building, which in game we get Ozuma, but in reality, the Japanese only started designing their super large, whatever you want to call them, cruisers after they heard about the US building the Alaska class to counter what they thought the Japanese was building. So it's a whole back and forth. It's a very funny story. It'll have to wait for when we get Alaska or go and do Ozuma. The design Wargaming settled on was a 234 millimeter or 9.2-inch main gun armed and three triple turrets and named ship after Sir Francis Drake. So now for Drake himself, born in the early 1540s, Francis Drake would be raised by relatives after his father, who was a farmer, fled England. These relatives being the Hawkins, who taught him the ways of the sea, both in the mercantile and the piratical sense. Later on, as a member of his family's fleet, he gained a reputation as an excellent navigator and captain, harassing the Spanish colonies, making himself very wealthy in the process. After building such a reputation for himself, in 1577, he was chosen to lead an expedition around South America through the Straits of Magellan and explore what lay beyond. He was also given permission to wreak havoc on any Spaniard he came across, and he did that. Absolutely. So, he set off with his flagship, being named the Pelican, leading a fleet of five, and they reached the Brazilian coast in the spring of 1578. Now, around this time, Drake renamed his ship in honor of one of his patrons, Sir Christopher Hatton, whose crest was that of a female red deer, which is also known as a Golden Hind. Now, Drake's flagship was called Golden Hind. By the time Drake had crossed the Straits of Magellan, his fleet had consisted only of the Golden Hind itself, with two of the smaller ships being just for supplies, having their rations transferred and abandoned by the time they got to Brazil. And the ship of his second in command was blown away during a fierce gale as they were crossing the straits and ended up returning to England, assuming Drake and the Golden Hind were lost. Now, Drake plundered his way up the Pacific coast, raiding ports, robbing merchants, galleons, looting plenty of booty of silver and gold, and these ships and Spaniards were not prepared as they thought they had domination and complete control over this peaceful ocean. And during this, there was the capture of the Spanish treasure galleon Nuestra Senora de la Concepcion, which was the largest treasure haul to date, with 26 tons of silver, half a ton of gold, and an assortment of porcelain, jewelry, coins, and jewels being the bounty Drake reaped. After a failed attempt to locate the Northwest Passage, getting to about where Vancouver is now, Drake sailed back down to what is now modern day San Francisco and claimed the surrounding area as New Albion in the name of Queen Elizabeth. In July 1579, he sailed westward for 68 days before he stopped off at a small island chain and then went on to the Philippines. After restocking here, he went on to the Moluccas, where he traded for spices from a sultan that was somewhat friendly to him. After this, Drake crossed the Indian Ocean, and after 2 years after crossing the Strait of Magellan, Golden Hind had returned to the Atlantic Ocean, but with only 56 of her original 100 crew remaining. On September 26, 1580, the Golden Hind landed in Plymouth Harbor, laden with riches, and Queen Elizabeth either personally came down or had a French ambassador that was there because of it wouldn't look good if she did it personally, but sources vary. And Drake was knighted either by Queen Elizabeth herself or by the French ambassador on her behalf, and so Drake became Sir Francis Drake. After this, Queen Elizabeth also declared the Golden Hind to be the first museum ship to be docked in Deptford in London on the Thames. And the Golden Hind remained here until about 1650, so quite a long time just to be sitting there. But by this time, it had been so rotten out that it was broken up. That's not the end of the Hind story. After this, Sir Francis Drake went on to do many things. He became the mayor of Plymouth. He played a crucial role in the defeat of the Spanish Armada. He was a partial leader of a failed counter armada of the English variety to invade Spain, but ultimately he met his end doing what he did best, harassing the Spanish on the high seas. Although it was no Spaniard that did him in, rather a fever. Now, I came across this quote I quite liked about Drake. Here it is. The people of quality dislike him for having risen so high from such a lowly family, and the rest say he is the main cause of wars. This is Gonzalo Gonzalez de Castillo in a letter to King Philip II in 1592. Now, for the Golden Hind story, several replicas have been made, some of which lasted a couple years, broke down. There was one that was made for a movie set, but it was not actually seaworthy. But in 1973, after being thoroughly analyzed and practices being put into place, a full size reconstruction of the Hind was built. And it sailed around the world, completing its own circumnavigation, starring in TV shows and movies, and has been open to the public as a museum since 1996 in Bankside, Southwark, London. That's very cool. You can go and visit. Not the same one, but as close as they were able to get it, which is very cool. I really appreciate that. Now, for Drake's skills, both of them have to do with privateering. So, Fearless Privateer and Flintlock Burst. Drake's quotes, many about being a privateer, exploring and seeking treasure, referencing Drake's quest for gold and exploration and harassing the Spanish. Now, she's a really interesting quote line, which is actually her disappointed line, which is she is willing to turn a blind eye to a few accidents, but if you keep doing this intentionally, don't expect any mercy from her. Drake was very well known for being very strict with his crews and his fleets, and on his circumnavigation, he executed a captain who Drake had thought was going to be rebellious. She also has a sorting line with John Bart. John Bart also being named after a famous privateer, this one being French, who was also very effective, just not the same level of fame as Francis Drake was. Now, Golden Hind's skills, unfortunately, I don't have as much for Golden Hind, which is unfortunate. They kind of focused on her personality as it is, not so much the reference side. But Pierce the Mistveil, Mist Veil being, you can't see because there's so much mist, so going through it, referencing Golden Hind being an exploration ship. And then Hinhorn's Grace, as we talked about earlier, Golden Hind or Golden Hind. A Hind is a female deer, which are often described as graceful. And one of the effects of this skill, she evades all attacks and heals herself when below 40% HP. On the way to the Indian Ocean, the Golden Hind hit a reef, but through Drake's leadership, she was saved with minimal damage. And then Golden Hind quotes, most of it, like I said, has to do with her personality and less so about her history. But Logan talking about have all the foods and liquor and anything you think of, referencing the vast amount of booty Drake captured with Golden Hind while raiding the Spanish on circumnavigation. So, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.